Brendan O'Neill joins me now. Brendan, I have longed for this day. So great to talk to you again. Your book, it's called A Heretic's Manifesto. Why heretic?
Well, Andrew, firstly, it's so good to be back on your show. I've really missed our chats. So it's a delight to be back on. Why heretic? Well, the point I make in my book is that we might not have literal witch trials anymore, but we have the atmosphere of the witch trial. And you see it all the time. You see it in the way in which gender critical feminists are demonized as TERFs, which basically means witches, if they defend the idea of biological sex or women only spaces. You see it in the way that anyone who criticizes climate change alarmism is denounced as a denier, and we must keep them off the airwaves. We must silence their blasphemy. Or the way in which anyone who criticizes radical Islam is called an Islamophobe. Criticize the Pride movement, you're called a homophobe. Criticize any aspect of transgenderism, and you're called a transphobe. This whole new grammar of condemnation has been built up to really silence people who criticize the contemporary orthodoxy. So the point I make in my book is, just as in the past, heretics rose up to challenge the stifling conformism of their time, I think we need to do something similar today.
Now, as you've just indicated, and as going through your book, as your book perfectly demonstrates, you've been most concerned, and you were for years on the show, about these attacks on our culture and the institutions of the English-speaking world, in particular Britain, Australia, also the US, and of course by the refusal, by the inability or the fear of actually saying these things, the punishment that would come in doing so. But looking at France now, it seems that a lot of things they've been warning about are there now on open display.
Yeah, it's really shocking what's happening in France. This is an orgy of nihilism, just destruction of people's own communities, destruction of great important buildings, libraries, and so on. This is a horrendous nihilistic assault on the French Republic. That's what we're facing here. And you know what worries me just as much as the riots themselves is the sympathetic response that I've seen among the Western commentariat. What's striking is that they're much more sympathetic to these rioters than they were to the Gilets jaunes, who protested in Paris and other parts of France every weekend for more than a year. They were pushing back against Macron's authoritarianism, and in particular, his eco-authoritarianism, where he wanted people to pay more for fuel and to really dent their bank balances. There was very little sympathy for the Gilets jaunes, but there's much more for these rioters. And I think what we're witnessing is a coming together of the Western intellectuals and these nihilistic rioters, in the sense that both of those people think that France deserves to be punished. They think it deserves to be punished for its supposed crimes of history, for the way it behaves, for its ideals, for its arrogance. I think we're seeing something really very worrying and disturbing in France, where there is this unity of thought between woke observers and rioters on the streets that this horrible republic deserves this punishment. I think it's a very worrying turn in the contemporary culture.
Well, I thought the burning down of two big public libraries, one in Marseille, that just, for me, said it all. I mean, this is civilization being razed, But looking at Britain and looking at Australia, what are the most dangerous attacks you see that we're facing in these culture wars?
Well, you've just nailed it there with your mention of the word civilization. And that's one of the points I make in my book. I make the point that I just don't think the phrase cancel culture, even though I use it all the time and it's very convenient, I don't think it captures what we're really up against at the moment. Because what we're living through right now is a reversal of the Enlightenment itself, an all-out assault on the gains of Western civilization. You see it everywhere. You see it even in the fact that it's impossible now to talk about biological sex without being demonized. The way in which, dead white European males are being taken off university syllabuses, Chaucer, Shakespeare, Milton, because why on earth should students only read white men? That's what people say. Or the demonization of classical music as too white. Museums are now too white. Everything is seen as racist and problematic. And there is this kind of cultural Taliban within the intellectual elites in the West itself that is launching attacks on the gains of the Enlightenment and the gains of Western civilization. And so that's why it's so important to push back against all of this, because we are defending culture itself and knowledge and freedom for future generations. So if there is cancel culture, what's really being cancelled is Western civilization itself. That is what is at stake right now in Britain, Australia, and in the US.
I can't agree with you more. I mean, I went to one of your museums, I think it was the Tate Britain, and you go to the bookshop there and it's just rows and rows of books, not so much about art, but about racism, about white privilege, about the, you know, the disgusting way white civilization is. It's just amazing. But what's most frustrating, I think you're right, cancel culture I think is terrible, but all that really is an attempt to shut us up from actually pointing out what's really happening in the wider culture wars. That's the most important thing. And yet though, Brendan, it is still really dangerous. If you can't speak out against this, if you don't dare, if you're going to lose your job, I mean, once you lose that right to speak, you lose the ability to defend yourself.
That's right. And it's a very difficult situation. There's a very stifling culture that we have to stand up against all the time. But, you know, there are flashes of optimism, I think. I think the vote for Brexit was a wonderful pushback against this new cultural authoritarianism and the technocratic elites. I think the people of Australia right now have got a wonderful opportunity to deliver a blow not only to their own political class, but to this broader global culture war in the vote on the Voice referendum. And the fact that the no vote seems to be rising, especially in rural Australia, especially in those parts of the Australia that have not yet been conquered by woke, I see that as incredibly positive. And, you know, voting no to the Voice idea in the referendum, I think, is a way of, firstly, holding back the racialization of the Australian constitution, which runs counter to the whole idea of equality and citizenship in Australia. But also, it would send a message to the world more broadly that woke is going too far. Ordinary people are not putting up with it anymore. So using our voices in that way to make a statement about our own beliefs is so important, and we've got to do it at every opportunity we get.
Couldn't agree with you more. I would add only two, and this is a side. I think the racial element is just the crucial thing. This is a crossroads. Saying no also tells the elite and all the corporates who put money in the Yes campaign, you don't run the country, ordinary people do. Once we get a vote, we can actually have a say in how this country is. Just give us a vote. Brendan O'Neill, your book is fantastic. Great to talk to you again. Hope we'll catch up soon again. Thank you so much for your time.